Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland.
Something has been hiding inside Stonehenge for 5,000 years, and it took a machine to finally see it. Fed 3 centuries of scans, measurements, mineral analyses, and ground surveys, artificial intelligence began pulling out patterns no human researcher had ever connected. Buried under the grass, locked inside the stone itself, sitting in plain sight the entire time. What it found does not add a footnote to the story of Stonehenge. It quietly dismantles that story and replaces it with something far stranger. The wrong story. Start with the version you grew up with, because it is the first thing to fall. Neolithic farmers, working with antler picks and rope and muscle, raised a ring of stones on a chalk plain through faith and patience across a few centuries of effort. It is a good story. It is also, in the year we are living in now, badly incomplete. Stonehenge sits on the open chalk of Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, 90 miles southwest of London, rising out of flat farmland in a way that has unsettled people for centuries. Not because it is beautiful, though it is, but because by rights it should not be standing there at all. The outer ring is built from sarsen stones, each more than 20 feet tall and weighing up to 25 tons. In 2020, a team led by geologist David Nash matched the chemical composition of the standing sarsens against bedrock samples from across southern Britain. 50 of the 52 stones tested matched a single patch of ground, the West Woods area of the Marlborough Downs, about 15 miles north. The builders did not grab the nearest available stone. They identified a source and hauled from it repeatedly. Then they did something stranger. They capped the uprights with horizontal lintels locked in place using real carpentry joints, mortise and tenon, tongue and groove. The kind of joinery you cut into wood, carved here into solid stone by people with no metal tools. The top surface of that lintel ring was leveled to within a few centimeters across the entire circle, on uneven ground. Modern crews with steel equipment still sweat over moving a single block of that weight. These people set dozens of them and made them align. That is not fumbling toward an idea. That is executing a plan already held completely in someone's head. And the sarsens are the local stones. Inside that ring stand the bluestones, 2 to 4 tons each, which did not come from 15 miles away. They came from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, 140 miles off. No wheel capable of bearing that weight. No crane, no iron, just rope, timber, water, and an enormous number of people who decided these particular stones from that particular place were worth moving across most of a country. Medieval writers attributed the whole monument to Merlin and to giants, because it looked like the work of something larger than any farmer who ever lived on that plain. We dismiss that instinct once radiocarbon dating pins the real builders. But the harder we measure what these people actually pulled off, the more those old explanations start sounding less like fantasy and more like an honest attempt to account for something that still does not fit comfortably into the story we tell ourselves. And the newest measurements, the ones the machines just handed back, push that discomfort well past the point of comfort. A stone from Scotland. The machines did not start with the famous standing stones. They started with the one in the middle that nobody could explain. At the dead center of Stonehenge lies a slab of pale sandstone, roughly 16 feet long and weighing around 6 tons, now lying flat beneath 2 collapsed sarsens. It carries a name entirely out of proportion to how poorly understood it has always been. The altar stone. For a century, the reasoning was simple. The altar stone sits among the bluestones. The bluestones are Welsh. Therefore, the altar stone is Welsh too. Everyone wrote it down. Nobody actually proved it, so a team of geologists took tiny fragments, including a piece chipped off in 1844, and read them not for appearance, but for the age and chemistry of individual mineral grains locked inside. Zircon, apatite, choi, rutile. Each grain a tiny geological clock recording when and where it first formed. They compared that fingerprint against the known bedrock of Britain and Ireland, region by region. The match was not in Wales. It was not anywhere in southern England. The grains matched the old red sandstone of the Orcadian Basin in the far northeast of Scotland. When the result was published in Nature in 2024, led by geoscientist Anthony Clark and his colleagues, it gave a definite, testable, independently verifiable answer for the first time in a century of theories. And the answer was almost absurd. The 6-ton centerpiece of Stonehenge had traveled at least 430 miles from the top corner of Scotland to a chalk plain in southern England. The longest journey ever recorded for any stone used in a Neolithic monument anywhere on Earth. Neolithic monument anywhere on Earth. The obvious escape hatch is to suggest a glacier carried the stone south during the last ice age, and builders simply found it nearby. Geomorphologist David Nash, who has studied exactly this question, considers that pathway essentially impossible for a block of that size along that route. The ice sheets did not extend far enough south to carry a stone from Orkney to Wiltshire, which leaves people. The leading hypothesis is that the stone was not dragged overland at all. It was placed on water and moved by sea around the coast of Britain, down most of the length of an island. A 6-ton slab on whatever vessel these people could construct, kept afloat and on course around hundreds of miles of dangerous coastline. If that is what happened, the altar stone is among the oldest hard evidence we possess for serious long-distance maritime navigation in Britain. And it says, the far north of Scotland and the south of England were bound into a single shared undertaking, important enough that one stone was worth the entire length of a country, communities hundreds of miles apart pulling toward the same patch of chalk, for reasons not one of them ever wrote down. The lonely Stonehenge of the postcards was never the real thing. The Welsh stones go back to the bluestones, the ones from 140 miles away. For decades, the argument centered on logistics. How do you move a 2-ton stone over that terrain? But that debate skipped the question that matters more. Why those stones? Why drag them from the Preseli Hills when perfectly adequate stone existed far closer? Archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson and his team spent years in the Preseli Hills and identified specific quarry sites. An outcrop called Carn Godog for the spotted dolerite, another called Craig Rossi Felin for a fine-grained rhyolite. They found the worked stone faces and loading platforms where pillars had been levered out and lowered. This was not casual gathering. People went to named places, extracted chosen pillars, and began the long haul east. And it was not only stone that made that journey. Stonehenge began as a cremation cemetery, one of the largest in Neolithic Britain. The burned remains of perhaps 150 individuals were set into pits around the young monument. Everyone assumed those dead were local. Then, in 2018, geochemist Christoph Snow, working again with Parker Pearson, found a way to read cremated bone that nobody had thought possible. Burning a body to cremation temperature was supposed to destroy its chemical history entirely. It turns out, fire does not erase the strontium isotope ratio recording what ground a person ate from in their final years. The team tested 25 individuals. At least 10 had not lived on the chalk of southern England. The most plausible geographic match was West Wales, the same region as the bluestones. It was not only the stones that made the 140-mile journey. It was people too. carried east to rest where their stones had been raised. Now, the stranger half of the answer. Some of the Preseli stones are what geologists call ringing rocks. Strike them, and instead of a dull thud, they produce a clear, bell-like metallic tone. Researcher Paul Devereaux documented this in the Preseli Hills and noted old local memory of stones that sing. Different stones ring at different pitches depending on size and mineral composition. This raises a genuinely startling possibility, and the honest researchers say so themselves. The bluestones may have been selected not only for how they looked, but for how they sounded. That somebody walked those hills striking stone after stone, listening, and kept only the ones that rang true. Of all the reasons to move stone 140 miles, the one the ground keeps hinting at is this. These may not have been only building blocks. They may have been instruments, which is exactly the thread the machines pulled next, when they stopped asking where the stones came from and started asking what the finished monument did to the air inside it. The sound inside here is something almost nobody thinks about when they picture Stonehenge. We always imagine it silent, but it was not built to be silent. It was built to be stood inside and filled with sound. And the shape of it does something very specific to that sound. You cannot test this at the monument as it stands today because most of it has fallen. So acoustic researchers built a complete physical model at 1:12 scale. Every stone in the position it held around 4,000 years ago when the structure was whole. Researchers Trevor Cox and Bruno Fazenda, working with archaeologist Susan Greene, placed it in an acoustic chamber and measured exactly how sound behaved inside, using a technique called auralization, borrowed from video game sound design. What came back was not mystical. It is more interesting for not being mystical. The intact monument was a genuinely good acoustic space. Sound made inside the ring reflected between the stones and lingered, giving a reverberation time of close to 2/3 of a second, striking for a structure with no roof and open gaps where you would expect sound to escape into the sky. Instead, the stones kept it circulating. A voice at the center was measurably amplified for people within the ring by around 4 decibels, while almost nothing carried beyond it. The inner space could hold only a small group, perhaps fewer than 50 people, so the sound was never for the masses outside. It was for the few allowed in, and the design made certain they felt it. To anyone standing in that ring while it worked, voices and drums feeding the stones, the place would not have registered as architecture. It would have felt like presence, like the stone itself was answering. I want to be honest about what the evidence does and does not support. Some accounts claim Stonehenge was an infrasound machine tuned to induce trance states with bodies placed on acoustic nodes by design. That is not what peer-reviewed research shows. There are low-frequency resonances in the structure, and the space strongly shapes sound. But the evidence points to something simpler and stranger. These people understood, by feel and by accumulated trial, how stone shapes sound, well enough to build a place where sound did exactly what they wanted. They were doing acoustics, thousands of years before anyone wrote the rules down. And if they could bend sound to their will, the next question almost asks itself, what else in this structure was tuned, not to the ear, to the sky? The moon in stone. You already know about the sun. The main axis of Stonehenge points to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. That alignment is real, deliberate, and has never been in serious doubt. What is far less known is the moon. 4 stones at Stonehenge are called the station stones, positioned in a rectangle. The short sides appear to align with one of the rarest astronomical events visible from Earth, the major lunar standstill. Over an 18.6-year cycle, the points where the moon rises and sets swing out to their widest extremes, then return. At the peak of that swing, the moon rises and sets further along the horizon than at any other time in the cycle. The last one peaked at the end of 2024. That timing is exactly why, across 2024 and into 2025, English heritage and archaeoastronomers from Oxford, Leicester, and Bournemouth, working with the Royal Astronomical Society, ran a dedicated observing program at Stonehenge to test whether those station stones genuinely frame the extreme moonrise and moonset. The honest state of it, the alignment looks real, but whether the builders specifically intended it remains actively debated. Tracking the moon is nothing like tracking the sun. The sun resets every year. A person can learn its extremes in one lifetime. The moon's full swing takes nearly 2 decades, meaning catching it at all would have required watchers handing the work down across generations. An oral tradition maintained with sufficient precision over roughly 2 decades, then acted upon in stone. If the alignment holds, Stonehenge was encoding both the sun and the moon inside a single structure, a map of the sky made in stone. And that pulls in the oldest, most argued-over feature on the site. Just inside the outer bank runs a ring of 56 pits, the Aubrey Holes, first documented by antiquarian John Aubrey in the 1660s. In the 1960s, astronomer Gerald Hawkins used an early mainframe computer to analyze their geometry, among the first times anyone directed computational power at an ancient monument, and asked it to find patterns a human analyst would miss. Hawkins, and later Fred Hoyle, proposed the ring functioned as a lunar calculator. Moving markers around the 56 holes let you track both the solar and lunar cycles and predict eclipses years in advance. Note that 56 is significant. 3 times the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle gives approximately 55.8, very close to 56. Many archaeologists remain skeptical. The alignment keeps refusing to look like an accident. We are seriously debating whether people 5,000 years ago carved the rhythm of the moon into the ground. And the moment the machines stopped staring at the stones and turned to look at the ground surrounding them, even that stopped being the strangest thing here. For most of its history, Stonehenge was studied as a monument standing alone on an empty plain. That assumption is now simply wrong. Starting around 2010, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, led by Vincent Gaffney and Wolfgang Neubauer, dragged ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers across roughly 14 square kilometers of surrounding land, building a 3-dimensional map of everything beneath the surface without excavating a single hole. The empty plain was not empty. The survey found between 15 and 17 previously unknown monuments, plus hundreds of smaller features nobody had recorded. A massive timber structure tied to funerary ritual, burial mounds, pit alignments, ring ditches, processional features, all lying directly beneath the feet of everyone who had ever studied the place. The blank field was crowded with structure, an entire ceremonial landscape readable only from the data all at once, from above, which no person in 5,000 years had ever been able to do. 2 finds stand out. About 2 miles from Stonehenge sits Durrington Walls, a giant earthwork already known to archaeologists. The radar found something buried beneath its bank, a row of up to 90 enormous standing stones, many toppled long ago and deliberately covered over. Some still survive more than 14 feet long beneath the soil, a hidden stone monument swallowed by a later earthwork. And Durrington Walls is far more than buried stones. Excavations led by Mike Parker Pearson uncovered one of the largest Neolithic settlements ever found in Northern Europe. Houses, hearths, and enormous deposits of animal bone representing feasting on a scale that implies massive seasonal gatherings. The people who built Stonehenge appear to have lived and eaten right here. Parker Pearson has argued the 2 sites were 2 halves of a single world. Durrington built in timber as a place for the living, Stonehenge built in stone as a place for the ancestors. linked by the River Avon and ceremonial avenues running to the water. Then, the strangest find of all. Around Durrington, the survey traced a ring of vast pits, each roughly 5 meters deep and 20 meters across, set in a circle nearly 2 kilometers wide. Published in 2020, the team argued it was one of the largest prehistoric structures ever found in Britain. Features known about for over a century, written off individually as natural ponds, revealed themselves as a single deliberate design more than a mile across, hiding in plain sight for 5,000 years. The real question. Let me be straightforward about the machines, because the truth is more interesting than the myth. There is no single artificial intelligence that swallowed Stonehenge whole and announced the final answer. What is real is a lineage of tools, each extending what we can see a little further, going back further than most people realize. When Hawkins tested those alignments in the 1960s, he used an early mainframe. We have been doing this for 60 years. We have just gotten dramatically better at it. In 2012, English Heritage had the monument laser scanned in fine detail, revealing faint Bronze Age carvings of axe heads and a dagger pecked into the sarsen surfaces, invisible to the human eye for centuries, until a machine mapped the stone face down to the millimeter. Ground-penetrating radar does the same underground. Mineral isotope analysis does it at the scale of individual grains, exactly how the altar stone gave up Scotland. The machine is not an oracle. It is a patient eye that never blinks and never forgets. Laid over 3 centuries of human observation, finally able to compare every measurement against every other simultaneously. The discoveries are still made by people. The machines let us see the whole picture at once. And when you see the whole picture at once, every thread pulls in the same direction. A 6-ton stone carried 430 miles from Scotland. Bluestones, chosen perhaps by ear, and hauled 140 miles with the people who valued them, carried the same way. A monument shaped to hold sound for the few allowed inside. An axis locked to the sun and possibly the moon. A ring of 56 pits that serious researchers still debate might track the sky. And around all of it, a designed landscape miles wide, invisible from the ground until now. One thread runs through every piece of this. None of it was built by one generation in one heroic push. The landscape was being laid out before the great stones ever rose. The whole project unfolded across something like 1,000 years, people adding to it who had been born into a plan begun by ancestors they never met, who died long before it was finished. All of it with no writing, no plans on paper, nothing but living memory and the stones themselves. An idea taught hand to hand across more than 30 generations, accurately enough that work begun by the first builders could still be continued by their most distant descendants. How they managed it is its own buried mystery, one the radar and the lasers cannot reach, because it never left a mark in the ground. It lived in people, and the people are gone. The question was never how. We are getting close to the how. The question is why it mattered enough. The sea voyages, the 140-mile hauls, the centuries of coordinated labor across communities separated by mountains and open water, all directed at a single place on a chalk plain. We can map every stone they moved and still not know what they were so determined not to forget. Whatever it was, they judged it worth more than comfort and more than ease, worth the lives it cost to carry. And they built it to outlast every single person who ever knew why. A message still sitting out there on the chalk, still keeping perfect time. Subscribe, because we are taking apart these old certainties one monument at a time, and the next one lands here first. Then tell me in the comments, knowing everything you now know, what do you think they were really watching the sky for? I read every answer. The best ones are usually braver than the experts.